What's going on, everybody? How y'all doing? This your brother Shabazz. Let me first start off by saying peace to all the positive people in the universe. Peace. What's good, Richmond, Virginia? Is it still cold outside? Yes, it is very much still frozen snow outside on the ground. Hotep to the Pan-African Black world and whoever else knows how to look beyond the smoke and mirrors. Now, we gonna be putting some new pieces together. We're going to be moving the puzzle pieces around, but putting them together to see the big picture once again tonight. We talking about, let me see, what was I going to say? What's going on? I hope I don't ruffle too many feathers tonight, but Christianity is on the hot seat. For all the algorithm chasers, Christianity is on the hot seat tonight. Now, don't get your panties in a bunch. I am not here to denigrate your beliefs, but I am here to challenge the Bible thumpers that told me I ain't know what I was talking about. So what we talking about for real? Now, I did a video earlier because Pam Bondi got on TV and said Jesus would never storm a church. Talking about, the protesters and whatnot trying to stand up for their rights in Minneapolis. And I was just like, wait a minute, hold on, shawty. What is you talking about? And so I did a video. I made my little explanations and whatnot. And Bible thumpers came from out of everywhere. All the nooks and crannies. Telling me I ain't know what I was talking about. So what I want to do tonight is simply say, what in the biblically illiterate hell is wrong with y'all? Because when you look at the text, storming the church is literally the most famous thing. Storming the church is arguably the most famous thing that man did. And that's true whether you believe in, you don't have to be a believer in the book. You don't have to be a practicing or a non-practicing or a recognized Christian. Anybody that picks up the book and reads it, when you get to those chapters, when you get to those epistles, when you get to those gospels, you will see that that was one of the most famous things that he did, whether you believe he existed or not. So this is not a question. This is not a conversation about faith. This is about what's on the page. What's literally sitting there on the page for you. So let's do this. Let's get this part straight right away. This is not an emotional thing. I'm not speaking politically. Technically, I'm not even speaking theologically, although I did consult some theologians. What we are going to do tonight is textually and academically take apart this story. So the question is, well, what do the Gospels say? And even more importantly, what does the scholarship say? Like, if you can't believe your own eyes when you see on the page, if you're uncertain about whether or not you should be taking that seriously, then you would say, well, what do academic people say? They dedicate their lives to studying this type of thing. What do they say? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the textual record. Now, as long as my technology works the way it's supposed to, I'm going to put this on the screen. Now, I hope you can see it. I know it ain't the biggest. Shout out to everybody joining in. If you're just entering, hit the like button, share this video, because we are going to get it cracking night with somebody that you know is interested in whether or not Jesus actually flipped them tables. But as you can see on the screen, I got several passages for you. Now, this event is commonly called, if you want to do your own little academic research type of thing on it, then it's commonly called the cleansing of the temple. And sure enough, in all four canonical gospels, canonical gospels. So I need to throw that word on the screen for you. Christianity is on the hot seat tonight. In all of the canonical gospels. That's what we look at. So in all four of the canonical gospels, y'all can see that on the screen there, they all say he did this thing. Matthew 21 from 12 to 13. I do find it rather interesting these 12s keep popping up, but that's another conversation. It says Jesus entered the temple courts and drove out all who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables. Okay, do you take issue with me saying flip and they said overturn? Because it's right there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. It is written, he said to them, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you're making it a den of robbers. So you tell me how in the world you come jumping all over my page talking about he didn't do that. He didn't flip no tables. He didn't enter the church. You just don't understand the words. I'm like, I know what I read. Mark 11, 15, 17. On reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers. So again, you go look at Luke 19 from 45 to 46. When Jesus entered the temple courts, he began to drive out those who were selling. John 2 from 14 to 16. In the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, get these out of here. Stop turning my father's house into a market. And so I'm like asking, I'm going to say this, I may come back to this several times. What in the biblically illiterate hell is you talking about? Telling me I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know what I'm reading. Are you like, how are you a Bible thumper? How are you a Christian? And you're going to say he didn't flip the tables when it said he flipped the table. This is something that is very curious to me. Across all these accounts, the core elements are consistent. He enters the temple area. He drives out the sellers. He overturns the money-changing tables. He disrupts commercial activity. And he declares that the space has been corrupted. Now, you specifically go look at John, because I know most of y'all love John. John even adds the extra piece. He constructed a whip and he physically drove them out. Sound like he on some protest-ish to me. Now, you can't tell me, well, it's metaphorical. No, it ain't. You can't tell me it's symbolic. No. This is a literal discussion. This is a literal writing of the account. It's described as a physical disruption inside a sacred religious space. Now, okay, quick scholarly note. Because like I said, I did my research. I consulted a couple of theologians. I looked at the books. I Googled. And some might say, wait a minute now. Well, see, there is a problem with the text. You don't understand the history of... Hold on. I openly admit, as a scholarly note, John places this event at the beginning of Jesus' ministry. Chapter 2. Now, I openly admit, I recognize that the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they place this event at the end during his final week in Jerusalem. Okay. Now, that don't mean it didn't happen. Maybe they confused about did it happen on Monday or did it happen on Wednesday? Maybe there's some historical confusion. Maybe there isn't. Maybe it's theological editing. That's what one of the theologians told me. John puts it early to signal that Jesus' entire mission is set up for the temple confrontation. And the synoptics put it late to show that it triggered his execution. But all four agree on the core fact. It happened. And it was disruptive. And that's what matters. So if people are saying that, you know, they want to live their life in accordance to the model of Jesus in the Bible, and they run out into them streets to protest corruption, to protest people who have power and authority and are using it inappropriately, seems to me that whether you look at Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, you're following the right path. So for Pam Bondi to say, Jesus would never do that, have you looked at the book? I mean, yeah, I guess it's possible, it's feasible that you can be a Christian and never read. Now, I had a couple of people, somebody put on my first video page, he did that outside the church. Now, here's when it gets interesting. Because they'll say, well, he did it outside the church. You don't know what you're talking about. You just don't understand. See, you ain't no Christian. Well, you right, I ain't no Christian. Now, if you're going to challenge me because I ain't no Christian, and I'm going to challenge you because you ain't no Greek. I'm going to challenge you because you ain't no Latin speaker. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I did the research. I did some research. I had to look it up. I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'm wrong if he didn't do it inside the church. Well, let's see. Let's go look. Let's dig. Let's go on down the rabbit hole. Do you know what I discovered? There's this thing called translation, you see. Now, yeah, it says church in the King James Version and, you know, the other iterations of. But they all tell you that this text was not written in English. It was not intended to be written or understood in English. It comes from the Greek. Now, we can have a conversation about whether it really is supposed to come from the Greek if the people were Hebrews, but that's another conversation altogether. And at the end of the day, the bottom line is this. If you look at the Greek that they say this text comes from, then the word is not church in the original Greek. The word, I will have you know, and I'm going to put this on the screen because I know I'm going to say it incorrectly. So, the word, do y'all see this right there? Y'all see that? Hieron. The word is Hieron. So in the Greek, when they say he entered the temple, he entered the church. No, what they actually said was he entered the Hieron. And it's just the translators that said, I wonder if I have to explain and define what Hieron is. But the Hieron, when you look at the Greek word and you look at the definition, Hieron means the entire complex, including the inner sanctum, sanctuary, and the outer courts. Now, I know, like I said, I know you don't want to hear this. But this is information that is useful for the edification, for the education, the benefit of the people. Shout out to Mr. K. Shout out to Mr. K. And he says, did you know the Geneva Bible predates the King James Version? Uh-oh. You won't get them Christians after you too, bro. I can't say that I knew, but I'm not surprised. Well, no, I think I did know, because I you know, one of the reasons this thing does grab my attention so much is I'm quick to tell you I'm not a Christian, but that don't mean I ain't read the Bible. That don't mean I ain't studied the Bible. That don't mean I ain't familiar with the Bible or some of the research surrounding it. I'm just not. I'm not a believer. And so now that does seems to strike a chord to me, Mr. K. So where was I? Okay, so now I'm sorry to bust your bubble. If you're stuck on the English version of the narrative, I gotta do this to you. Because like I said, this thing was never supposed to be translated into English. They didn't know anything about English at the time that they was writing this. They didn't say, well, we can't use Hieron because 500 years down the road, it's some people that's going to speak English and they ain't going to understand. No, they said Hieron. And in their language, Hieron meant the entire temple complex. Now, if you happen to be somebody that's stuck on an English version, perhaps you can actually blame King James. Or like Mr. K said, maybe you need to blame the Geneva Bible, or whoever did the first English one that really got it going and made every other little English group decide they're going to do their own version of it. But it is very important to know, it's very important to understand that the entire text was originally written in a language that you're just not familiar with. And I'm not saying that like, that's not a dagger. I'm not familiar with it. I'm not familiar with Greek either. But I am familiar with how to look up words. I am familiar with how to research how words get translated from one language to another, how concepts get translated. And I'm familiar that the research says oftentimes things get lost in translation. And so now I'll say this, if you're not going to seek out the entire language, and I ain't saying you got to learn Greek. Lord knows I wouldn't want to. I don't want to, and I have no time. I have no expectations, no intentions of learning Greek. You don't have to learn the whole language to understand what's going on. I mean, me personally, if I'm going to put any time into learning another language, a language other than the one that was just given to me by the naturality of being born under the dominions of Uncle Sam, I would spend my energy on learning an African language, not a Greek one. But hey, that's me. And that's me. Let's put that to the side. I digress. My bad. So, but the word we are talking about is hieron. It's the Greek word. So again, it didn't mean church. I'm sorry that you're unfamiliar with the concept and the idea. But when they wrote it, they were saying he entered the entire complex, the entire temple complex. And this is what he began doing. So since that's the word they're using, again, blame your translators for their poor translation, because that created a poor understanding of what's really going on. I'm just trying to give you what? Say it with me. A proper perspective. So let's go back. Hieron, that's the word. The court of the Gentiles, where this went down. And where was it? Where was it physically located? Inside the sacred precinct. It was under the priestly jurisdiction. It was part of the temple's ritual economy. You might want to look that up. So if Pam Bondi and other Christians, other Bible thumpers want you to think what you're talking about is a parking lot protest. No, what I'm talking about is literally what Jesus did. He entered the church. He entered the temple complex. And the actions that he took were considered an institutional disruption inside the house. Yeah, pretty much like what them brothers and sisters, what them people, what them men and women, what them American citizens are doing in Minneapolis. Now, we're going to keep on going down this yellow brick road of truth. So let's talk historicity. And what does historicity mean? Historicity means there's an actual layer or lane of scholarship where scholars, students, professionals, researchers, they dig into the documents. They dig up the bones, so to speak. And they want to determine, did this actually happen? That's what historicity refers to. Now, I'll be honest with you. It's not all 100%. There's not a 100% agreement or consensus. Scholars disagree. Now, this is to some extent, this is natural and it's normal. Scholars are going to disagree on the historicity of a character or an event, especially when you're talking about a religion and religious narratives. But I'm going to give you a few names that you can check out if you so desire. Maurice Casey. He argues for the historical reality of the temple action, the historical reality. And he doesn't just say it happened. He actually took the time to reconstruct the original Aramaic behind the Greek text. Now that's important. Because remember earlier I said, you can have a conversation, you can have an argument about as to whether or not those people actually spoke Greek. A lot of the history, a lot of the facts actually show that they spoke Aramaic. So that means there's just one more level and layer of translation. It was written, it occurred in Aramaic, and then people wrote it in Greek, and eventually it got translated into English. But in the Aramaic, it still stands that he entered the entire complex and he disrupted everything by flipping the tables. Matter of fact, Casey goes into even greater detail, and he says that the phrase "den of robbers" in Greek is, now forgive me for butchering the Greek language, I told you I don't speak it, speleon leston. And he says that this phrase, this Greek phrase, comes from the Aramaic emarath paritza. I'm going to put that on the screen because I already know. Hold on, let me see something. Mr. K says, I take it you knew the Ethiopian Bible predates both and is one of the oldest biblical publications. Oh, yeah, I knew that one, bro. I did. I knew that one. That was what. Shout out to the Ethiopian Bible and the Ethiopian people for having their own little version that most people don't know about. And one of the best things about that one is they got the pictures. Let me put this little tidbit on the screen for you. Since we're talking about the Hieron. Because this scholar here, he said the phrase "den of robbers" in Greek, and y'all can see that at the bottom of the screen. I can't read Greek and I can't hardly pronounce it right. So speleon leston. Casey shows that this translates the Aramaic phrase. That is the Greek translation of the Aramaic phrase, and the Aramaic phrase is emarath paritza. Emarath paritza. I feel like I'm learning a new language already. Now here's the key. In the Second Temple Jewish usage, paritza, it didn't mean thieves. Once again, here we go with these translators messing up your understanding of the book you say that you hold dear to you. Paritza did not mean thieves. It didn't mean pickpockets. Paritza is a word that they use for people who were considered back then, at that time, in that culture, violent insurrectionists and political rebels. Almost to the extent of, if you were called a paritza back then, it's almost like being called, it's almost like when white folk want to say something bad about the Black Panthers. Put the puzzle pieces together and understand what I'm trying to say to you. Read between the lines. Critical thinking skills. So when first century Jews, when they heard a den of lestai, they weren't thinking economic fraud. They were thinking political threat. The same way Pam Bondi was thinking when she turned on her television and saw all those people in the streets. This is a political threat. Emarath paritza. This shifts the entire reading from an economic critique Like, it was bad enough if you just stuck with the English, then it would have been okay. It's a critique about the economic policies of the church. But now when we don't go digging and we look at the actual language and see what they were saying, oh, it gets deeper than that. Guess what? It gets blacker than that. Now we hit upon a nerve, because what was really going on is anti-institutional insurgency, at least according to Casey. That's how Casey, that's the information, that's the scholarship and the research that Casey dug up when he tracked and traced the Greek back to the original Aramaic that the people actually spoke. Now, as I said, the scholarship is not all on the same page with this. So there's another guy by the name of Metzdorf. And he classifies the event as a historical occurrence. So he does say it actually happened. And he uses, there's a certain methodology. Almost every researcher uses, they lean into a different methodology based on, what it is that they're going to be focused on. So he's using historical critical methodology and literary analysis. I love literary analysis. That's one of the methodologies I had to use. Now, you also got Craig Evans. He frames the event as historically significant because it clarifies Jesus's mission and makes his execution intelligible within Roman political reality. Did you catch what that meant? Craig Evans is saying the only way the execution makes any sense is for Rome to have looked at this table flipper like, this guy's a threat. He's a problem. He's going to make it very bad for us to keep the masses under control. In other words, this table flipping won't no small thing. This table flipping at least was looked at like this could be the start of something big, like a no kings protest. Now you even got this other guy named E.P. Sanders. He argues the event was probably smaller scale than the Gospels make it sound. He says it's probably more symbolic than a full-on riot. And that's cool. You know why? That's an okay, fair, decent, historical reading. He don't say it didn't happen, like the fools that jumped on my other video. So yeah, even Sanders, he don't deny that Jesus physically overturned the tables, flipped them up. He doesn't deny that he drove the money folk out. His debate is about scale, not about whether it happened. Now, in the interest of fairness, somebody put on my page, you're not being fair. You're not being honest about this conversation because other people other people have proven otherwise. Far be it from me to be the person that isn't fair. So I looked into it. Yes, there are scholars that say something else. One of them, John Dominic Crowson. Sorry if I get the name wrong. John Dominic Crowson. He questions whether the event happened at all or whether or not it was a narrative creation. He seems to think that the writers of the book intentionally wrote it so that it would fulfill Old Testament policy. I'm sorry, not policy, Old Testament prophecy. And he specifically says Zechariah 14:21 is the proof that brings his puzzle pieces together. And in Zechariah 14:21 it says, there shall no longer be traitors in the house of the Lord. Traitors not as in Benedict Arnold, traitors as in you give me this, I'll give you that. Now, in all honesty, that's a legitimate scholarly position. But here's what matters. It still doesn't deny the fact that in the book, the man flipped over the tables. That's a conversation for how you believe in the text. It's not a conversation for did it occur. So what matters for our purposes for this conversation, whether you think this is history or you think this is theology, whether it happened exactly as it was described, or whether other writers, other communities shaped it and massaged, fudged the numbers. One thing is undeniable. One thing is not debatable. All four gospels still describe table flipping. And the research says that the table flipping was tantamount to institutional disruption, like when the Black Panthers showed up in California at the state capitol. The entire institution of white supremacy in California was like, oh my Lord. So what does that mean? Now that's where the conversation will really get interesting. So again, now, if your defense is, well, maybe it was a small disruption. If your defense is, maybe it was symbolic. Okay, I ain't mad at you. Small disruption is still disruption. Symbolic disruption is still disruption. It still happened in the public. It still was a exceedingly confrontational incident. And it was still inside the church institution grounds. And that's not fringe scholarship. That is, and I hate this word, but it fits. That is what mainstream historical critical approaches admits. So again, where are the Bible thumpers? Where are they getting their information from? They didn't pull it out the book. The book says he did it, and you say, no, he didn't. The research says he did it, and you say, well, that's not a fair assessment. There's nobody that says it didn't happen, except perhaps an atheist. And an atheist position would be the whole book is garbage, is malarkey, is baloney, because none of it is real. That's not the conversation we having, but that's the only thing in my mind that would make sense. If you're an atheist and you say, well, none of it happened, then you can say, well, you can't say that he flipped the tables, he never existed. That's not but that's not the conversation. The conversation is what is on the page. If you're turning the text to Matthew 21, 12, 13, are you telling me it doesn't say that he flipped stuff over? Serious scholarship does not treat this episode as one-dimensional. That's another interesting thing. It can be interpreted through multiple academic lenses. The historical, that's what I just laid out. Casey, Metzdorf, Evans, even Buchanan. They treat the incident as an actual historical disruption rooted in first century temple practice. We talked about symbolic, the symbolism. Wedderburn and I'm going to get his name wrong too, Chanakusi. Because they see the action as symbolically framed in the narrative to communicate theological meaning. I can't find any research that said it didn't happen. Borg and Evans interpret the event as confrontation with institutional authority structures. I mean, she's going up against the man, the way they used to say in the 70s. Stick it to the man. That's what he did. Now, a scholar named Ådna, and a scholar named Shaner, they analyzed they analyzed the temple as a religious economic system. They analyzed the act as disruption of that economy. Now, y'all know what happened. What happened over here when black people hit the streets and disrupt the economy? That's what happens when we protest. But it could go on and on. You got purity and prophetic critiques. And they say they see the action as Jesus critiquing ritual corruption or declaring eschatological judgment. Again, everybody has a different interpretation of the meaning, but only these Pam Bondiists are under the impression that Jesus didn't flip tables. So, like I said in my other video, I said it this way. What in the pro-black hell is you talking about? And I said that for a very specific reason. If you are going to be a reader of the Bible, if you are going to be a believer of the Bible, and if you want to consider yourself a follower of the main character, then you should be up for, you should be willing to model his behavior. But let me get off my soapbox. Let's look at the church, the temple context, the Hieron. Because it was not just a worship site. You didn't go to the Hieron just to worship. Just like most people don't go to church today just to worship. It was a religious institution. Now, up until up until George Bush fooled everybody, dangled the carrot of extra government money, the church was a religious and a political institution and an economic institution and a social control structure. Now it's just social control and religious. But the temple context, the complex, what people meant by church way back then was all four of them rolled up into one. And you couldn't, some things you couldn't do, not without the proper permissions. What am I talking about? Money changers were not random merchants. Now you can go downtown in your city today, wherever you live, and you can get a vendor's license and pop up on the corner and say, I'm a merchant. You couldn't do that at the Hieron. You couldn't do that at the church. They weren't random merchants. They were part of a regulated system tied to sacrifice, ritual purity, and access to worship. Now, Ådna identifies the targets, the money changers, the vendors of doves, and the vessels used for transport of either money or sacrificial ingredients. That's who Jesus attacked. That's who he protested against. That places the action inside institutional religious economics, not personal morality. Now again, somebody in the comments said, but he only disrupted the sellers, not the worshipers. That's why I'm talking about this. That's real cute. Because here's the thing. You had to go to the sellers before you go to worship. You couldn't worship without the sellers. The temple system required temple approved currency for offerings. So you couldn't just walk up there and say, oh my God, I need to pray. I need to get into the temple so I can pray, my dear Lord. Where's your money? And you can't give you can't even take your money up in there. You give us the money. We gonna give you church dollars. You take the church dollars inside. You're required temple approved animals for sacrifice. And you, well, people ain't even supposed to be sacrificed. Hey, I ain't got nothing to do with that. But back then, there was animal sacrifice. But you couldn't just be somebody that, you couldn't be a sheep herder and you got your own sheep. Well, I'm gonna come on down here with my little sheep, my little lamb, and I'm gonna sacrifice this unto the Lord. No, you ain't. You can't bring your own sheep to the sacrifice. You gotta buy one of ours. And that came from the church. The money changers weren't freelancers. They were licensed by the priestly authorities to operate in what? The court of the Gentiles. So when Jesus flips their tables, he's not just mad. He's not just protesting against capitalism. He's protesting the religious gatekeeping infrastructure that keeps everything operating. I'm telling you, this whole thing, Pam Bondi is a trip. You can't separate the sellers from the worship system, because the money changers, the vendors, the sellers were the worship system. You don't break bread with them, you don't break bread with your Lord. Now, I know we can say today, no, because I got a personal relationship with my... I'm not here attacking your religious belief system. I'm telling you, historically speaking, this is how it was. One of the reasons today, a lot of us proclaim our individual personal connection to our Lord, whichever one that might be, is because we already recognize a problem with the Hieron, the church system, the temple complex. But that's today. Back then, you couldn't worship in the temple without their system. You needed that temple-approved currency. You needed that temple-approved animal. The money changers and the dove sellers weren't separate from the worship. They were literally the gatekeepers to the worship. So again, when your boy overturned them tables, he was protesting. He was disrupting commerce. He was disrupting access to the religious system itself. Now, I don't know if I can put this guy on the screen, but here's another name for you: Reza Aslan. Reza Aslan. And let me see if I can get to. I probably can't. Well, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna put this on the screen. Let me put this on the screen this way. So Reza Aslan remove that, add this share screen. There we go. So see if we can get this to show on the screen the right way. Reza Aslan. There we go. It's coming, ladies and gentlemen. Here we go. So Reza Aslan, that's the scholar we talking about, man. In his best-selling book, Zealot, he takes this analysis further. He argues that the temple wasn't just corrupt, it was literally Roman collaborationist. The high priests were appointed by Rome. The temple economy was enriched, or the temple economy enriched Roman interests. So when Jesus disrupts it, it's not just critiquing religion, he's committing anti-imperial resistance. This matters. This sounds like what we do when we hit them streets in protest. In fact, Reza Aslan says Jesus' attack on the temple was an attack on the priestly nobility, but it was also an attack on Roman control of Judea. It was, in essence, an act of insurrection. And that goes right back to the Aramaic words that were used. I can't say it. I gotta, didn't I put it on the screen? I'll put it on the screen. So that goes right back to those words. Mayaroth Paritzaya, the Aramaic word for insurrectionists. So now I mentioned earlier Jeremiah. Let's look a little bit closer at that. Maybe I'll put that on the screen. I will put this on the screen also. There we go. So let's put this on the screen for a hot second. Because here's something else that gets missed. When Jesus says, "You have made it a den of robbers," he's quoting Jeremiah 7:11. Now, I don't care if you say, like some of the other scholars was like, well, he didn't really say it. It was something that the Bible writers threw in there. Again, that's a conversation for whether or not you believe in the religiosity of it. The fact still remains, it is in the text. Has this house which bears my name become a den of robbers to you? But I have been watching, declares the Lord. Go now to the place in Shiloh, where I first made a dwelling for my name, and see what I did to it, because of the wickedness of my people Israel. Therefore, what I did to Shiloh, I will now do to the house that bears my name. Now, okay, trying to have a little fun with the voices. But this is what they say Jesus said. I don't care if he said it or not. This is what you read in the text. Now, do you know? Now, I know, well, I can't say I know that the Bible thumpers know, because the Bible thumpers are telling me Jesus didn't flip the tables. But it's very interesting if you go and do the reading. Guess what God did to Shiloh? He destroyed it. So when Jesus quotes Jeremiah 7, he's not just criticizing the temple, he's threatening them. I'm going to flip this table just to remind you what I did last time. That's a prophecy threat. This temple will be destroyed for its corruption. Now, I know a lot of people out here talking about Jesus was a peaceful reformer. How do you explain this then? This is very much along the lines of judgment language. Now, here's where it gets even sharper. The Greek word translated as robbers or thieves, that's that lestai. But Reza Eslan in Zealot, well, actually the whole title of the book is Zealot, the life and times of Jesus of Nazareth. But he points out something critical. He says lestai is often rendered into English as thieves. That's what he said. He says it is often rendered as thieves. We'll put that on the screen. Lestai is often rendered to English as thieves, but it actually means bandits, and was the most common Roman designation for an insurrectionist or a rebel. So back then, in that language, if they pointed the finger at somebody and said lestai, they were saying insurrectionist. They weren't saying robber. They weren't saying thief. They were saying insurrectionist. Now you translate that into what we're seeing today. What are they calling the people protesting in Minneapolis? Insurrectionists. That's not just semantics. When your boy was crucified, they say he was crucified he was in the middle, and what did he have on either side of him? Two lestai. Now again, I'm sorry if you stuck in the English King James version or what have you. I'm sorry that you're stuck in the translator's mind. Because lestai didn't mean thief. Lestai didn't mean robber. Lestai meant insurrectionist, rebel. So when Jesus calls the temple authorities a den of lestai, he's not saying that they're running a thrift store scam. He's not complaining about price gouging. He's calling them terrorists, insurrectionists. And then they turn around and be like, okay, we're going to do something about this. This dude is calling us out for all our money-making capitalism. So this temple action was what the Roman authorities would have deemed a capital offense. Sedition, punishable by crucifixion. Why? Because an attack on the business of the temple is akin to an attack on the priestly nobility, which, considering the temple tangled relationship with Rome, like an octopus in all of its 8 arms, it's tantamount to an attack on Rome itself. So read that again. An attack on the temple is an attack on Rome. I swear that sounds like something I heard the Trumpster say. Maybe not. Something else is in my head. The temple wasn't just a house of worship. It was a Roman-backed economic institution. Disrupt the temple, you disrupt Rome's power structure. That's not peaceful religious reform. In Rome's eyes, that's treason. That's what we put you on the cross for. So in the Bible, if Jesus is when Jesus is invoking Jeremiah 7:11, where the prophet warns that the temple has become a hideout for those who exploit the vulnerable, the millionaires and the billionaires who are in charge of everything, he's calling them collaborators with revolutionaries, or more likely traitors who sided with Rome against the people. That's a political accusation, not a religious one, not a spiritual one. So let's move on. We almost finished, almost got to the end. Let's be clear about what we're dealing with here. Now, you may have heard this term, messianic. Jesus led a messianic movement, preaching the kingdom of God. But here's what of all the names of all the scholars I've given, I'm gonna go back to Reza Aslan. And he says, I think I need to put this one on the screen too. So let me get that up there on the screen. And get at least most of it on the screen. The notion that the leader of a popular messianic movement calling movement calling for the imposition of the kingdom of God could have remained uninvolved in the revolutionary fervor that had gripped nearly every Jew in Judea is simply ridiculous. Kingdom of God wasn't a Sunday school phrase. It was a rival political claim to Caesar's empire. And y'all all know what is Caesar's must be rendered unto Caesar. Not according to this brother that flipped the table. Nah, what the table flipper was doing is sedition. Plain and simple. And Rome crucified him for it. Now, there's another scholar, Craig Evans, and he writes in Bulletin for Biblical Research. He says the temple action, the cleansing of the temple, clarifies Jesus' mission with respect to Israel and makes intelligible his execution at the hands of the Romans. Translation, this is a major factor in why they killed him. They didn't kill him because he was speaking in parables. They didn't kill him because he was kind and turning water into wine. They didn't kill him because 40 loaves of bread and fish. They killed him because he publicly embarrassed the religious and the political power in the most sacred space in, at that time, Hebrew life. And that's what made him dangerous. Same way they said, Malcolm X got too much power for a black man. Martin Luther King got too much power for a black man. Are you comparing those two brothers to Jesus? Yes. In that respect, yes. Now you might be thinking, somebody be thinking, well, if the table flipping was so disruptive, why wasn't he arrested immediately? Something don't smell right. The math ain't math. Well, Mark says he left the temple that night and came back the next day. Scholars offer a few explanations. I already went over some of them. Some say it was a smaller scale than the Gospels dramatized. It was symbolic enough to make a point, but it wasn't big enough to trigger immediate arrest. This is when you get into the interpretation of it. But whether he was arrested immediately or they went back and started to surveil him, that doesn't discredit the fact that he flipped them tables. He pulled out a whip. So maybe he had enough popular support that arresting him publicly would itself have caused a riot. And the authorities didn't want to pass over insurrection. Maybe the religious elite were building a case, gathering witnesses, coordinating with Roman authorities, and any other snitches that might be amongst the group. But here's what we know for sure. Within days of this action, he is arrested, he is tried, he is executed. So the temple disruption and the crucifixion are linked, cause and effect linked in all four of the gospel accounts. And you can't say that's a coincidence. At the end of the day, he was not arrested for his sermon. He was not arrested for his parables. He was not executed for his kindness. He was dangerous because he demonstrated the willingness, the desire, the ability, the capacity to disrupt the system. The temple action places him in direct conflict with religious authority, institutional control and power, public order, and economic stability. That is what creates political risk. That's why we have people like the good brother Minister Louis Farrakhan saying an economic war is the one that you need to be waging. Because that's when you threaten institutional control, economic stability, public order, Christmas, and etc. and etc. So before I close, let me be clear about where I'm coming from. If you didn't already guess it, if you haven't read between the lines, I'm reading this text literally, and I'm using a Black interpretive lens. So yeah, I'm going to center power, resistance, and the voices that are usually written out of what they like to call mainstream neutral scholarship. But I'm using mainstream neutral scholarship to prove my very point. Because really, in all actuality, there's no such thing as neutral interpretation. There is no such thing as neutral scholarship. Everybody has a bias. You have to read in between the lines to determine what the bias is and to determine whether or not a person's bias has compromised their interpretation. Every reading comes from somewhere. Every scholar has a standpoint, a position, a belief. Every translator has a standpoint and interpretation of belief. Now, mine is rooted in a tradition that asks who holds the power and who's got the most to lose if the power is disrupted. Who resists the power and who's got the most to gain by resisting. And how does this text function in that struggle? Yeah, so that's the lens I'm bringing in. And yeah, that matters, at least for me, to be honest with you. But at the same time, all the Bible thumpers that told me I ain't know what I was talking about. And is there a gospel I'm unaware of that says Mark, Matthew, Luke, and Paul are lying? So when Pam Bondi or anybody else who made the comments, when you say Jesus would never storm a church and protest of the people running it, that's not a theological position. You're marketing something else. Because the Gospels literally describe him doing exactly that. He stormed the Hieron. He flipped the tables. He pulled out a whip and said, y'all better GTFOH. Then you got Matthew 21, Mark 11, Luke 19, John 2, 4 different authors, same event, physical disruption, religious authority, public confrontation. Put the puzzle pieces together. Look beyond the smoke and mirrors, my people. Come on. And you can prefer a Jesus who never makes the powerful feel uncomfortable. But you can't show and prove it with the text, because that ain't in there. The dude in the book flipped the tables, made whips, called religious elites thieves. He quoted prophets who predicted the temple's destruction, and they killed him for it. That's not, see, there's no point of trying to have a sanitized version of that. There's no point of trying to have a passive version of that. There's no point of trying to have a harmless version of that. It was, in effect, he was, in effect, a disruptive individual inside the center of religious power itself. And this is not about what feels comfortable, Pam Bondi, or any of you other Bible thumpers. It's about what the text says. It's about what scholarship actually proves. You ain't got to take my word. I gave you all the sources. I told you the names. Study the text. Study the scholars. Don't go outsourcing your theology. Now, again, we can duke it out in the comment section. I'm waiting. I'm here for it. You can tell me all over again how wrong I am. I doubt you can cite a source. But if you can, I'm here for it. And I will go back and forth with you about it. So, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, thank you for listening, participating. Shout out to everybody that was in the comments. Shout out to everybody watching, still watching. Like, share, and subscribe. Oh, hold on. What I'm supposed to do? Y'all see who I'm repping. The only Trojan. The only Greek I will rep. But shout out to everybody for paying attention. Like, share, and subscribe. That's the name of the game. It gets the algorithm jumping. You know, I got the QR code up there. Of course, if you wanted to do something like send a cash app, I ain't gonna be mad at you, but I ain't really supposed to be talking like that. So let me shut up. It's your brother Shabazz, sometimes Professor Shabazz. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you keep watching. Like, share, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell. And remember, the notification bell, when you hit it, you got to hit all. You got to hit the all button. Because that's the only way you get all of the notifications. When they do the personalized thing, they don't send you anything. So, with that being said, Unless somebody else wanted to throw something into the chat room, or unless somebody wanted to come along and jump on, I'll send the link if that were the case. But otherwise, we finished for this evening, and we're going to get up out of here. Peace.